It started with hope. That's the thing that keeps you going when everything feels like it's slipping. Hope that maybe, just maybe, you can patch the holes in a sinking ship. The kids were with my sister, so for the first time in what felt like forever, it was just Maya and me. I planned the night down to the last detail, thinking it might help us find our way back to each other. Dinner from her favorite bistro sat on the table, still warm in its takeout containers. The kind of music we used to dance to years ago hummed softly in the background. I even set the table with real plates instead of the mismatched ones we usually used. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was something, a quiet effort to remind us, of what we once had. But as the hours ticked by and the food grew cold, that hope turned to unease. Maya wasn't just late, she was silent. No text, no call, nothing. I'd already started cleaning up when my phone buzzed on the counter. I grabbed it quickly, thinking maybe she was stuck in traffic or caught up at work. Instead, it was a text that would change everything. Don't wait up. Spending the night with someone amazing, winking face. I stared at the screen, not sure if I'd read it right. The casual cruelty of it felt like a slap, the kind you don't see coming. My legs gave out, and I sat at the edge of the couch, phone still in hand. The emptiness of the house swallowed me whole. For a long moment, I just sat there. The words burned into my mind. Someone amazing? The thought made me laugh bitterly. What did that make me, then? It wasn't the kind of heartbreak that breaks clean. It was jagged, sharp, cutting me open in places I didn't know could hurt. My first instinct was to call her, demand an explanation, but what was the point? The message was loud and clear. Maya wasn't coming back that night, and maybe she never would. When I couldn't sit still any longer, I grabbed my keys and left. Driving through the quiet streets, I had no destination. Just me, the hum of the engine, and the thoughts racing in my mind. Every corner I turned brought a different memory of us. The coffee shop where we met. The park where I proposed. Even the little bakery where we'd grab donuts on lazy Sunday mornings. By the time I got back home, the ache had morphed into something else. Anger. If Maya thought she could throw away everything we'd built like it was nothing, she had another thing coming. I wasn't going to be the fool she left behind without consequence. The rest of the night was a blur. Packing, pacing, trying to think clearly. The house we'd built together suddenly felt like a stranger's, full of lies I hadn't seen until now. I didn't sleep. How could I? All I could think about was making her feel what it meant to lose everything, just like I had. The next morning, the house felt eerily quiet, even for an empty one. I stared at the packed bags by the door, mine, and ones I'd thrown together for the kids. It wasn't a decision I made lightly. I didn't want them to feel the ripple of what Maya had done more than they had to. But they couldn't stay here, not in this house that had become a shrine to betrayal. As I went through the motions, something nagged at me. Maya wasn't careless. At least, she never used to be. This message, the blatant way she delivered it, felt too brazen for someone who had always been so careful. If she was bold enough to flaunt her affair like this, it meant there was more to the story, something bigger she wasn't telling me. That's when I noticed little things. Her bottle of perfume was gone, the one she only used for special occasions. A sleek black dress she hadn't worn in months was missing from the closet. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. Let her have her cheap thrills. But when I opened the nightstand drawer on her side of the bed, my stomach churned. There it was, a small notebook. Harmless looking at first glance, just a plain cover with a few pages slightly dog-eared. But the second I flipped it open, I knew I'd found something I wasn't supposed to see. Dates. Times. Locations. Cryptic initials scrawled next to them. Some of them matched nights she'd claimed to be working late or going out with friends. My hands trembled as I pieced it together. This wasn't a one-time fling. Maya had been running a whole second life behind my back, and she wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. Flipping through those pages, I couldn't tell if the lump in my throat was anger or grief. Maybe both. This was the woman I'd loved for a decade, the mother of my children, and she'd reduced us to a set of lies scribbled in a notebook. And she'd been so bold, so sure I'd never find out. That was the worst part. How little she thought of me, of us. But I wasn't going to break down. Not now. Instead, I pulled my laptop out and started digging deeper. Maya had always been bad with passwords, often reusing the same ones. After a few guesses, I was in her email. The messages were right there, plain as day. There were exchanges with some guy who signed off as C, full of inside jokes and references to places I'd never heard of. Weekend getaways, expensive dinners, and gifts that she had somehow managed to hide from me. But it wasn't just the betrayal that stung, it was the mockery. They laughed about me, about my trust, about the life I'd thought we were building together. I took screenshots of everything, every email, every message. The notebook went into my bag, along with a spare hard drive where I saved the digital proof. If she wanted to destroy me, fine. But I wasn't going down without a fight. By the time I was done, the house didn't feel like mine anymore. Every room held pieces of her betrayal, and it was suffocating. I grabbed the bags and left, locking the door behind me without looking back. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. By the time I left the house, the anger was no longer simmering, it was boiling. Every mile I drove felt like a countdown to something explosive. Maya might have fooled me for months, maybe even years, but I was done being her blindfolded partner in a one-sided dance. I didn't know where I was headed at first, just that I couldn't stay there. The notebook sat on the passenger seat, its pages practically taunting me. Those initials, the dates, they weren't just details, they were breadcrumbs. Maya had left me a trail, and I wasn't about to ignore it. I started with the obvious. Her friends. She had a tight-knit group of women she'd go out with regularly, always claiming it was just harmless girl time. But in hindsight, those nights had always felt off. Too frequent, too secretive. So, I called the one person I thought might crack under pressure. Jen, her old college roommate. "Hey, Jen. It's Ethan," I started, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, Ethan. This is a surprise. Everything okay?" she asked, sounding genuinely caught off guard. "Not really. I need to ask you something, and I'd appreciate it if you'd be straight with me. Has she mentioned someone named C to you? Or anything about spending time with someone lately?" There was a pause. Too long to be innocent. When Jen finally spoke, her tone was cautious. "Ethan, what's going on? Did you guys have a fight or something?" "Jen, don't do that. Just answer me, please." My voice cracked a little, and I hated how vulnerable I sounded, but I didn't care. She sighed heavily, and I could almost hear her debating with herself. "Look, Maya's my friend. I don't want to get in the middle of anything. She's not just your friend, Jen. She's my wife. Or at least, she's supposed to be." I could feel my grip tightening on the steering wheel. "If you know something, now's the time to tell me." Another pause. Then finally, "Ethan, I think you should talk to Maya." That was all I needed to hear. "Got it," I said coldly, and hung up before she could add anything else. I pulled over, gripping the notebook like it might give me more answers if I stared at it hard enough. Jen's response confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a phase. Maya's betrayal was real, and it wasn't just one person keeping her secrets. The next step was obvious, though I hated the thought of it. I needed to know who C was, and I wasn't about to wait for Maya to hand me the answer. I'd seen a couple of phone numbers in the emails I'd read earlier, ones she didn't bother hiding because they were saved under fake contact names like work client or delivery service. One number stood out, a string of texts about meeting up the same night she sent me that gut punch of a message. I dialed it, my hand trembling slightly as I waited for someone to pick up. "Hello." A male voice, smooth but unfamiliar. "Who is this?" I demanded, skipping any pretense. There was a pause, then a chuckle. I think you've got the wrong number, man." "No, I don't," I snapped. "You've been texting my wife." Silence. Then the tone shifted completely. "Look, I don't know who you are, but—" "Don't even try it," I cut him off. "I know about you and Maya. I know everything. So why don't you save us both some time and tell me what the hell you're doing with her?" He didn't hang up. That surprised me. Instead, he sighed like I was inconveniencing him. "Fine. If you know, then you know. What do you want?" His casual tone made my blood boil. "What do I want?" I repeated. "I want to know how long this has been going on." I want to know why you think it's okay to mess with someone else's marriage. Hey man, it's not like that, he said, feigning innocence. She told me you guys were done. Said you were just living together for the kids. It felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. What? She said you were separated. That it was just a matter of time before you both moved on. The lie was so bold it almost knocked me over. Separated? Living together for the kids? That wasn't just bending the truth. It was twisting it into something unrecognizable. Do me a favor, I said, my voice low and cold. Don't contact her again. And when you see her next, because I know you will, tell her she's about to lose everything. Before he could respond, I ended the call and hurled my phone onto the passenger seat. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding like I'd just run a marathon. Maya hadn't just betrayed me. She'd rewritten the entire narrative of our marriage to suit her own needs. And that was the moment I decided she wasn't just going to feel regret. She was going to feel ruin. The drive back home felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unravel from behind a glass wall. Maya's lies weren't just cracks anymore. They were gaping holes, swallowing everything I thought I knew about her, and about us. But anger had a way of sharpening my focus. I wasn't stumbling through this blindly anymore. I had a plan, and every part of it was going to hit her where it hurt most. When I walked through the door, the house was still eerily quiet, like it was holding its breath for what was about to come. I didn't unpack the bags I'd taken out earlier. There was no point. I wasn't staying. Instead, I sat at the dining table, the same table I'd set so carefully the night before, and spread out the evidence I'd collected. Screenshots, the notebook, a printed list of calls and messages I'd pulled from our shared phone bill. Every piece of her betrayal was laid bare in front of me. I wasn't just gathering this for myself. I needed leverage. If this was going to end, it wasn't going to end on her terms. Maya needed to understand that she couldn't twist the truth to fit her narrative anymore. That's when the door finally opened. She stepped in casually, like it was just another day, her purse slung over her shoulder, a faint smile playing on her lips. For a split second, I wondered how she could look so calm, so normal, after everything she'd done. Hey, she said, setting her bag on the counter. Sorry I didn't text you earlier. Work ran late. I stared at her, not saying a word. The audacity of it, the gall to stand there and keep lying, made my blood boil. You're really going to stand there and pretend nothing happened? I asked, my voice quieter than I expected. She froze for a moment, then turned to look at me, her expression unreadable. What are you talking about? I stood up slowly, gesturing to the table. This. I'm talking about all of this, Maya. Her eyes flickered to the spread of evidence, and for the first time, I saw a crack in her composure. But she recovered quickly, crossing her arms and giving me that practiced look of indifference. You went through my stuff, she said, her tone accusatory, like she was the one who'd been wronged. You're damn right I did, I snapped, the anger bubbling to the surface. And you know what I found? Proof. Proof of everything you've been lying about. She sighed dramatically, like I was being unreasonable. Ethan, you're overreacting. I don't know what you think you found, but... Don't, I interrupted, my voice sharp. Don't you dare stand there and try to gaslight me. I know about him. I know about all of it. For a moment, she said nothing, her arms tightening across her chest. Then she rolled her eyes, the defiance I'd expected finally showing through. Fine. You caught me. Congratulations. What do you want? A medal? Her words hit like a slap, but I refused to let her see it. I want you to admit it, I said firmly. Admit what you've been doing behind my back, and then explain to me how you could look me in the eye every day and lie. Maya scoffed, shaking her head. You're being so dramatic, Ethan. It's not like I was planning to leave you. It was just... Stop. My voice was louder now, cutting through her excuses. Don't even try to downplay this. You've been sneaking around for months, lying to me, lying to the kids, lying to everyone. And for what? For some guy who doesn't even respect you enough to keep this quiet. That struck a nerve. Her eyes narrowed, and she stepped closer, her tone growing sharper. Don't you dare pretend like you're some innocent victim in all of this. Do you even hear yourself? You've been checked out of this marriage for years, Ethan. You don't listen, you don't pay attention. You just go through the motions like everything's fine. I stared at her, stunned by the audacity of her response. You're blaming me? After everything you've done, you're actually standing there and blaming me. Yes, I am, she shot back. Because maybe if you'd actually cared, I wouldn't have had to find someone else to make me feel alive again. The words hung in the air like a slap, echoing in the silence that followed. For a moment, I couldn't speak, couldn't even think. When I finally found my voice, it was calm. Too calm. You're unbelievable, you know that? I said quietly. You destroy everything we've built, and now you're trying to pin it on me. But guess what, Maya? I'm done. I'm done trying to make sense of your lies. You want to feel alive? Fine. Let's see how alive you feel when you're standing in the wreckage of this marriage, with nothing left but your lies to keep you company. She opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't give her the chance. I grabbed the folder of evidence, shoved it into my bag, and headed for the door. Oh, and by the way, I added, pausing in the doorway, you might want to start thinking about how you're going to explain all of this to your parents. Because I'm not keeping your secrets anymore. Her stunned silence followed me as I walked out, the door slamming behind me. I parked in an empty lot, needing a place to think. The folder of evidence sat in the passenger seat, the weight of it almost physical. I flipped through the pages again, studying each screenshot, each note. This wasn't just about hurting her back, it was about making sure she felt the full weight of her choices. I wasn't just going to walk away quietly. I was going to dismantle the house of lies she'd built, brick by brick. First on the list was her lover. See, the smug voice from the phone call replayed in my head, fueling the fire in my chest. He thought he could steal what wasn't his and walk away unscathed. That wasn't going to happen. If he wanted to play a part in wrecking my life, he'd better be prepared to have his own dragged into the spotlight. But before I could confront him properly, I needed more ammunition. The emails and texts were damning, sure, but I wanted to make sure he couldn't weasel out of it. I spent the next few hours digging deeper, using every tool at my disposal. Social media, professional profiles, anything that could tie him to Maya and expose him for what he was. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for, a trail of photos, tagged locations, and even a few careless posts that confirmed his identity. His name wasn't just C. It was Chris. A mid-level manager at some tech company downtown. Married. 2 kids. That was all I needed. He had as much to lose as Maya. Maybe more. With the pieces coming together, I shifted my focus to Maya's parents. They'd always adored her, treating her like she could do no wrong. I wondered how they'd feel when they found out their perfect daughter had been lying to everyone, dragging her family through the mud for a fling with a married man. I drafted a carefully worded email, attaching some of the most incriminating screenshots. Nothing over the top, just enough to paint a clear picture of the situation. My tone was calm, almost professional. I didn't want them to think this was a petty spat. I wanted them to understand the full scope of what Maya had done. Before hitting send, I hesitated for a moment. Was this too far? But then I thought about the text she sent me, the lies she told, the way she'd tried to blame me for her choices. No, this wasn't too far. It was fair. With a deep breath, I clicked send. Next on the list were our friends. The people who'd stood by us through birthdays, anniversaries, and everything in between. Maya had built her reputation on being the perfect wife, the doting mother. It was time to show them who she really was. I wasn't going to blow up her social life with some dramatic post. That wasn't my style. Instead, I started sending private messages to the people who mattered most, attaching the same evidence I'd shared with her parents. I kept it simple, explaining that I felt they deserved to know the truth. The responses started pouring in almost immediately. Shock, disbelief, sympathy. Some couldn't believe Maya was capable of something like this. Others admitted they'd noticed she'd been acting differently but didn't want to pry. By the time I was done, it felt like the first real step toward taking control of the situation. Maya wasn't going to spin this into some story where she was the hero. Not this time. I leaned back in my seat, staring out at the darkening sky. It wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. But for the first time in days, I felt like I was moving forward. Chris, her parents, our friends, they were just the beginning. Next, I'd make sure Maya herself faced the full force of what she'd done. She thought she could walk away unscathed. I was about to prove her wrong. By the next morning, I had already felt the ripples of my actions. The messages I'd sent to Maya's parents and our mutual friends were starting to take effect. Her carefully constructed world of lies was crumbling, and I could sense it. My phone buzzed constantly with replies, some offering sympathy, others shocked at what they were reading. One message caught my attention. From Jen, her college roommate, the same one who had dodged my questions the day before. "Ethan, I had no idea it was this bad. Can we talk? Please." I almost ignored it. Part of me didn't want to deal with someone who'd clearly been covering for Maya. But another part of me, the part that still wanted answers, decided to call her back. When Jen picked up, she sounded flustered. "Ethan, I don't know what to say. I had no idea she was seeing that guy while still pretending things were fine with you. I thought you two were separated." That's what she told me. "Yeah, seems to be her favorite story these days," I replied bitterly. "So you're saying you didn't know the whole truth?" "I swear, Ethan. She mentioned someone once, but I didn't think it was serious. I didn't want to push. I mean, she's my friend," her voice trailed off, the guilt creeping in. "And I was your friend too," I said, cutting her off. "But thanks for confirming what I already knew. She's been lying to everyone." Before she could respond, I ended the call. There was no point in dragging it out. The real turning point came later that afternoon. Maya's mom called. "Ethan, what is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. I could picture her clutching her pearls, the very image of someone who had always believed in appearances. "It's exactly what it looks like, Linda," I said, keeping my tone steady. "Your daughter's been lying to me, and to you, for months." There was silence on the other end. Then, quietly, "We raised her better than this." "I thought so too," I replied. Linda asked a few more questions, her tone a mix of shock and disappointment. By the end of the call, it was clear she wasn't just upset with Maya. She was furious. "Thank you for telling us, Ethan. We'll handle this." That was all I needed to hear. Later that evening, I got my next update in the form of a phone call from Chris's wife. "Is this Ethan?" she asked, her voice shaky but determined. "Yes," I said cautiously. "This is Sarah. I'm Chris's wife. I just got some emails from you." I could hear the tremor in her voice, the weight of what she'd just discovered. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way," I said sincerely. "But you deserved to know." There was a long pause before she replied. "Thank you for telling me. I've suspected something for a while, but I didn't have proof until now." Her voice cracked, but she held it together. "He's not home yet, but when he gets here, he's going to regret this." I didn't envy Chris. By nightfall, I was back at the house, not because I wanted to be, but because I needed to collect more of my things. The house felt even colder now, the silence almost oppressive. Maya wasn't home, likely licking her wounds somewhere, but I didn't care where she was. This wasn't her home anymore, not in the way it used to be. As I packed, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Maya. "We need to talk. Please." I stared at the message for a moment before replying. "You're right. We do. But it's not going to go the way you think." She responded almost instantly. "Ethan, please. I made a mistake, but we can fix this." A mistake? That word felt laughable. This wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated betrayal. But I wasn't going to argue over text. "Tomorrow," I typed back. "Be here by 6. We'll talk then." The clock was ticking, and for the first time, I felt like I was the one setting the terms. By the time 6 p.m. rolled around the next day, the house felt like a pressure cooker ready to blow. I'd spent the afternoon going over everything, ensuring I was prepared for whatever Maya tried to throw at me. The folder of evidence sat on the table like a silent witness, ready to speak if she dared lie again. When the door finally opened, Maya stepped in hesitantly. She wasn't her usual composed self. Her hair was hastily tied back, and she wore no makeup, something she almost never skipped. It was as if she wanted to appear vulnerable, or maybe she just couldn't muster the energy to keep up appearances anymore. "Ethan," she started, her voice soft, almost pleading. "Sit," I said, motioning to the chair across from me. She hesitated but eventually obeyed, her eyes flicking to the folder on the table. "What's that?" she asked, though I could tell she already knew. "Everything," I replied simply. The room was heavy with silence, the kind that presses down on you, making it hard to breathe. Finally, I spoke. "I'm going to make this simple, Maya. No more lies. No more excuses. I want the truth, about Chris, about everything. If you try to spin this, I promise you, it'll only make things worse." Her lips trembled, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But instead, she straightened in her seat, her tone shifting to something defensive. "Ethan, I know I messed up but—" "No," I interrupted sharply. "You don't get to do that. You don't get to start this conversation with excuses. I've already spoken to Chris. I know about the texts, the trips, the lies you've told everyone. What I want to know is why." She flinched as if my words had physically hit her. I don't know," she stammered. "I guess I just felt—" "Spare me the clichés," I snapped. "You didn't just feel anything, Maya. You made choices. So tell me, what was it? Boredom? Ego? Did it make you feel powerful to see how far you could push before I caught on?" Her face crumpled, and she finally broke. "It wasn't like that, Ethan. I wasn't trying to hurt you." I laughed bitterly. "Well, congratulations. You managed to anyway." She wiped at her eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. "Chris made me feel seen. Like I wasn't just a mom or a wife but someone who mattered." I shook my head, disgusted. "Do you even hear yourself? You mattered to me, Maya. You mattered to the kids. But instead of talking to me, instead of trying to fix whatever you thought was broken, you decided to blow up our entire life for a cheap thrill." She opened her mouth to respond, but I wasn't finished. "And don't even try to paint Chris as some kind of savior. He's a married man with 2 kids, and he used you just as much as you used him." Her silence was damning. I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of the moment settle. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my tone cold and deliberate. "I've already spoken to your parents. They know everything. So do most of our friends. I didn't do this to humiliate you, Maya. I did it because I refused to let you control the narrative. People deserve to know the truth." Her eyes widened, the realization hitting her like a truck. You told my parents?" "I did. And Chris's wife knows too. She called me last night, by the way. She's planning to leave him. I wonder if you'll get a Christmas card from them this year." Maya buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking as sobs overtook her. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of something. Pity, maybe. But it was quickly replaced by the cold reality of what she'd done. "You said you wanted to fix this," I continued, my voice steady. "But here's the thing, Maya, there's no fixing this. Not for us. I've already started the process for divorce." Her head snapped up, her tear-streaked face a mask of desperation. "Ethan, no. Please, we can get through this. For the kids, for us." "Stop," I said, cutting her off. "Don't you dare use the kids as leverage. They deserve better than to grow up in a house built on lies. And as for us? There is no us, Maya. Not anymore." Her sobs grew louder, but I refused to let it sway me. I stood, grabbing the folder and tucking it under my arm. "You're going to stay here tonight," I said. "The kids need at least one of us to act like an adult, and I don't trust you to do it long term. I'll find a place for myself and the kids soon enough. But until then, don't try to spin this into something it's not. You destroyed this, Maya. Now you get to live with the consequences." Without waiting for her response, I turned and walked out the door, letting it slam behind me. The air outside hit me like a slap, sharp and cold, but it didn't clear my head. My hands shook, not from the chill but from the intensity of the confrontation. The sight of Maya breaking down, her mask finally cracking, should have given me some sense of satisfaction. It didn't. I wasn't looking for vindication, I was looking for closure, and I was starting to realize it wouldn't come that easily. I didn't go far, just to a cheap motel on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it was quiet. Exactly what I needed. Sitting on the stiff bed with nothing but the hum of the heater in the background, I replayed the scene in my head. Her sobs. Her excuses. The audacity to beg for reconciliation after everything she'd done. I couldn't stop wondering how long it had been going on. Not just the affair, but the lies, the secrecy, the disconnection. When had she started looking at me and seeing less than enough? The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Linda, Maya's mom. "Ethan, can we talk? Please. We're heartbroken about everything. We had no idea." I hesitated before replying. Part of me wanted to cut ties with her family altogether. After all, they were Maya's blood, not mine. But another part of me knew they had the right to understand the gravity of what had happened. When I called, Linda answered on the first ring. "Ethan," she began, her voice heavy with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I don't even know what to say." "There's not much to say, Linda," I replied bluntly. "Your daughter made her choices, and now we're all dealing with the fallout." She sighed, the weight of it evident even over the phone. "We talked to her last night. She told us everything. Well, almost everything. I don't think she even realizes the full extent of what she's done yet." "Of course she doesn't," I said bitterly. "She's been living in her own little world, where actions don't have consequences." Linda was silent for a moment. "Ethan, I know you probably don't want to hear this right now, but we love you. You've been part of our family for years, and this doesn't change that. Whatever you need, whether it's help with the kids or just someone to talk to, we're here." Her words caught me off guard. For the first time since this whole mess began, I felt a crack in the armor I'd been wearing. "Thanks, Linda," I said quietly. "That means more than you know." Later that day, I finally reached out to my sister, Diane, the one who'd taken the kids for the weekend. I hadn't told her everything yet, just that Maya and I were having serious issues. When I arrived at her house, she greeted me with a warm hug, her usual no-nonsense demeanor softening when she saw the look on my face. "What happened?" she asked, guiding me into the kitchen. I didn't hold back. For the next half hour, I unloaded everything. Maya's affair, the lies, the confrontation. Diane listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from shock to anger to sadness. "That woman," she said finally, shaking her head. "I always knew she had a selfish streak, but this is a whole new level." "Yeah," I said, running a hand through my hair. "It's not just about me though. It's the kids. They deserve better than this mess." "They do," Diane agreed. "And so do you." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I'd spent so much time focusing on what the kids needed, what Maya deserved, that I hadn't stopped to think about myself. As I packed the kids' things into my car, preparing to take them back to what was now a fractured home, Diane pulled me aside. "Ethan," she said, her tone firm, "you're doing the right thing by putting the kids first. But don't forget to take care of yourself too. This isn't just about surviving, it's about building a life you can actually enjoy again." I nodded, though her words felt like a distant echo. Right now, enjoyment seemed like a foreign concept. When I pulled into the driveway of the house, the sight of it made my stomach twist. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like the scene of a crime, a place where trust had been shattered beyond repair. Maya was waiting by the door, her face pale and drawn. She didn't say anything as I helped the kids unload, her eyes following every move. "Daddy, are you staying here tonight?" Lily asked, her voice small. I crouched down to her level, forcing a smile. "Not tonight, sweetie. But I'll see you tomorrow, okay?" She nodded, her little face serious. "Mommy was crying a lot," she whispered. "Did you make her sad?" The question cut deeper than I expected. "No, honey," I said gently. "Sometimes grown-ups just make each other sad without meaning to." As I stood and kissed both kids goodnight, I avoided looking at Maya. I couldn't. Not yet. "Tomorrow," I said as I stepped back out the door. "We'll talk more tomorrow." The next day came faster than I was ready for. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the weight of everything hit me all over again. I had planned to focus on the kids, to keep things as normal as possible for them. But there was no avoiding the confrontation waiting for me inside. Maya opened the door as soon as I knocked, her face a mix of exhaustion and forced resolve. She stepped aside silently, letting me in. The kids were in the living room, their laughter from a cartoon playing on TV a stark contrast to the tension hanging in the air. "We need to talk," Maya said quietly, motioning toward the kitchen. I followed her, bracing myself for another round of excuses. She sat at the table, wringing her hands nervously, while I stayed standing, leaning against the counter. Ethan, I know I've already said this, but I am so sorry, she began, her voice trembling. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I realize how badly I've hurt you and the kids. You've realized now? I interrupted, my tone harsher than I intended. Now that you've been caught, you suddenly feel sorry? She flinched but held her ground. I deserve that. I know I do. But Ethan, I want to make this right. For the kids, if nothing else. I shook my head, letting out a bitter laugh. Maya, there is no making this right. You didn't just hurt me. You shattered everything. Our marriage, our trust, our family. And now you want to act like we can just patch it up and move on. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't soften. I couldn't. What do you expect me to do, Ethan? She asked, her voice breaking. I know I messed up, but I can't change what happened. All I can do is try to fix things moving forward. Fix things? I repeated, incredulous. Maya, this isn't something you fix. This is something you survive. And right now, the only thing I care about is making sure the kids come out of this as unscathed as possible. She wiped at her face, her tears falling freely now. I don't want to lose them, she whispered. I don't want to lose you. Well, you should have thought about that before, I said coldly. The silence that followed was deafening. Maya stared down at her hands, her shoulders slumping under the weight of my words. Finally, I spoke again, my tone softer but still firm. Here's how this is going to work. I'm staying with Diane for now, but I'll be here for the kids every day. School drop-offs, pickups, everything. They're not going to feel like their dad just disappeared, and I'm not letting them get caught in the middle of this mess. She nodded weakly, not looking up. And as for us, I continued, this marriage is over, Maya. I've already started filing the paperwork, and you'll be hearing from my lawyer soon. Her head snapped up at that, panic flashing in her eyes. Ethan, please, don't do this. We can go to counseling, work through this. No, I said firmly. You can go to counseling if you want, Maya. Maybe figure out why you thought it was okay to destroy everything we built. But I'm done. I'm not going to put myself through the pain of pretending this is salvageable. Her tears came harder now, her sobs filling the room. But I didn't move to comfort her. Not this time. Before I left, I spent some time with the kids, trying to soak up the moments of normalcy. We played a board game, and for a little while, their laughter made me forget the storm brewing in the background. As I tucked Lily into bed, she looked up at me with wide, curious eyes. Daddy, are you going to stay tomorrow? I'll be here every day, sweetheart, I promised, kissing her forehead. And Mommy, she asked softly. I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. Mommy and Daddy are working through some things right now. But no matter what, we both love you and Luke very much. That will never change. She nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer, and snuggled into her pillow. Back in the living room, Maya was waiting by the door, her arms crossed protectively over her chest. Ethan, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Not tonight, I said, cutting her off. I've said everything I needed to say. And with that, I walked out, letting the door close softly behind me. The days that followed were a whirlwind of logistics and emotion. I focused on the essentials, the kids, my work, and laying the groundwork for the next chapter of my life. Each step felt like reclaiming a little piece of myself that Maya had tried to erase with her lies and betrayal. Diane had been a rock through it all, her home becoming a sanctuary for me while I navigated the chaos. We spent late nights talking over coffee, her no-nonsense advice cutting through my lingering doubts. Ethan, she said one night, fixing me with a stern look, you've been through hell, but you've got to stop carrying this like it's all on you. She did this, not you. Remember that. I nodded, though her words were still sinking in. Maya was quieter in the days following our confrontation. She didn't try to argue with me anymore, didn't send long texts begging for reconciliation. Maybe she realized the futility of it, or maybe the weight of her actions had finally started to sink in. Either way, I was grateful for the space. We agreed on a custody arrangement that gave me equal time with the kids. That was the only part of this whole mess that mattered to me, making sure they felt loved and stable, even as everything else around them shifted. The first weekend I had them at Diane's, I tried to make it special. We baked cookies, or tried to. Luke got more flour on the counter than in the bowl, built a fort in the living room, and watched their favorite movies. For the first time in what felt like forever, I saw them laugh without hesitation, their joy untainted by the tension they'd sensed at home. That night, as I tucked them in, Lily wrapped her arms around my neck and whispered, "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, sweetheart," I replied, my throat tightening. The final blow to Maya's carefully constructed world came a week later when I heard from Chris's wife, Sarah. "I just wanted you to know," she said over the phone, her tone clipped but resolute, "I've filed for divorce." Chris tried to spin some sob story about how it was all a mistake, but I'm done. "Good for you," I replied. "You deserve better than what he gave you." "So do you," she said simply, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't expected, hope. The day the divorce papers were finalized, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, sadness, anger, and a glimmer of freedom all swirling together. Maya had signed without a fight, perhaps realizing that she had no ground to stand on. That night, I went to the park with the kids. As they ran ahead, chasing each other in the glow of the setting sun, I sat on a bench and let the moment sink in. The worst was over. I had survived. It wasn't the life I had planned, and there was still a long road ahead. But for the first time, I felt like I could breathe again. Closure didn't come with a dramatic confrontation or a grand gesture. It came in the quiet moments, in the sound of my kids laughing, in the warmth of Diane's unwavering support, in the realization that I had the strength to move forward, even when the world felt like it had fallen apart. Maya's actions had left scars, but they didn't define me. And as I sat there, watching the stars emerge in the twilight sky, I made a promise to myself. I would rebuild. For my kids, for my future, and for the man I knew I could be. This was the end of one story, but it was also the beginning of another. And this time, it was mine to write.